recording. As always, I love a lot of Twitter love, and our hashtag as always is Empower with Tech. So if you're enjoying Cathy's points, then please do some Twitter love and tag us with @Empower with Tech, and I will happily retweet away at the end of the talk. So I am beyond thrilled to introduce the amazing Cathy Pearl. Cathy is the head of conversational design outreach at Google and the author of the O'Reilly book, Designing Voice User Interfaces. She has been creating voice user interfaces for nearly 20 years. I need to get her face cream because I cannot believe that it's been 20 years. And is passionate about helping everyone create the best conversational experience possible. Previously, Cathy was Vice President of User Experience at Sensely, whose virtual nurse avatar helps people stay healthy. She's worked on everything from programming a NASA helicopter pilot simulator to designing a conversational app in which Esquire magazine's style columnists tell users what they should wear on a first date. She has an MS in computer science from the University of Indiana and a BS in cognitive science from the University of San Diego. And without further ado, I give you Cathy Pearl.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I am currently in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm about 20 miles south of San Francisco. It is a really nice day here. It's super hot. We're having a heat wave, but that's nice. And yeah, I'm thankful that we can still have these virtual meetings during this crazy, wacky time. And it's great to have people from be around the world, be able to get together. Yesterday, Google offers these online fitness classes, and yesterday afternoon I took one from an instructor who was in Tokyo starting his morning there, and I just thought, wow, this is just like amazing that these types of things can happen. So let me start sharing my screen and I'll get into my presentation. All right, are people able to see my slides?
Yeah, and I think if you switch your video back on, switch your video back on.
Oh yeah, let me switch my video back on. I don't know why it turns it off automatically. Let me get that back on. Okay, how are we now?
Brilliant.
Okay, excellent. All right, so this talk is sort of a general introduction to conversation design. In case you're wondering what it is, or maybe you've heard of it and you want to know more, even if you already know some things about conversation design, hopefully there'll be a few things in here that are new to you. So I want to start with a short movie clip. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this. I'm going to start it right now.
Who's your dude, back? Oh. I thought you said your dad did not back. That is not my dog.
All right, so for anyone who's not familiar with this old movie from the 70s, it's a Pink Panther story. And the reason I bring this movie into this talk is because what makes this clip funny? And one way to frame the humor here is to look at something called the cooperative principle. So there was a British philosopher of language, Paul Grice, who in the 70s came up with the cooperative principle to kind of represent how it is that we humans have successful conversations with each other. And he came up with these 4 maxims of quality, quantity, relevance, and manner to explain when we're having a good conversation, we're trying to tell the truth, usually. We're trying to use words the other person will understand. We're trying to bring in a little context. And when we don't do those things, that's when conversations fall down. So what's happening here is that the hotel proprietor is breaking Grice's maxim of relevance. He's talking about a dog that nobody else knows about, is not in the room. Obviously, Inspector Clouseau is talking about the dog that's right there in front of him. And that's, he breaks that convention. That's what makes it funny. Another example is my son, who was 12. If I say, do you know what time it is? And he says, yes, he's breaking the maximum of quality. Obviously, I want him to tell me the time. So as conversation designers, we can use things like the cooperative principle to help us understand when conversations with computers fall down, because sometimes it's because we've broken one of these maxims. So we use it as a way of framing not just our human-to-human conversations, but computer-human conversations as well. And at a high level, conversation design is essentially how we create experiences that enable computers to communicate like humans and not the other way around. And to me, I think about all the technology around us and how we have to learn all these things like remote controls and apps and swiping and tapping and menus. We've got to learn those things, and we do. But the goal of conversation design is to say, look, we all know how to talk. Can we take advantage of that and just talk to each other rather than relying on these new paradigms? And I want to make the point that we shouldn't be trying to pretend that we're human. The idea isn't like, let's fake it and make people think we're human. It's, no, let's leverage the ways that people already talk so that we can just skip the like learning how to do things and hopefully get people what they need with computers in a faster and more efficient way. Now, as a conversation designer, what you often run into is people saying, well, how hard can it be? You know, I've been having conversations since I was 3, and what's the big deal? Why do I have to pay some fancy conversation designer to do this work? And to me, the reason is kind of twofold. One is that conversation, although many of us are good conversationalists, understanding the rules of conversation is much harder. If I asked you to write down the rules of conversation, you might fall back on things like writing rules, like, oh, we shouldn't end a sentence in a preposition, which is not how we talk. So it's partly understanding those elements and being able to articulate them, but it's also being able to do so within the technical constraints. Like, you can design a beautiful conversation, but if it cannot be built with the technology we have, then it doesn't really matter. So a conversation designer kind of brings those things together. And to sort of think about like maybe a real life example, let's say I asked you to design a bot, and I said, can you please design a bot that allows people to order lunch? So let's constrain it. And let's say you come back to me with this design and you present it to me in the form of what we call a sample dialogue, which is like a potential conversation between the bot and a person. So you come back to me and you say, okay, the order bot's gonna say, how can I help you? I say, I want a tuna salad. We ask the dressing. That'll be $11. How would you like to pay? Credit card. Great, I'll use your credit card on file. Have a nice day. Thanks. You're like, this is easy. It's a closed domain. There's only so many things a person can say. This will be no problem. And the reason I choose this example is because back in the day when we used to like go to cafes and stuff, when I was working at an office, I would often go to this one cafe to order a tuna salad. And one day I came back from ordering it and I wrote down the conversation that I had because it was actually more complex than I might have thought it would be. So the real conversation went like this. The cashier says to me, how can I help you? And I start to say, can I please have the tuna salad? But there's like several parts to this order. Like, do I want croutons and what kind of dressing? So rather than blurt it all out, because he probably won't be able to, you know, hear all of it, I'm watching him and I'm watching him press the button. And then I'm like, okay, he's ready for the next bit of input. And then I say, you know, with croutons, and I watch him press the button. But then I have a problem because I go to 2 different cafes that have 2 different tuna salads with 2 different similar sounding dressings. One's honey lemon and one is, I don't remember the other one, lemon herb. And I can't remember which one is at this cafe. So I indicate that with my voice. And the lemon herb dressing or whatever. And what does he do? He doesn't say anything at all. Just nods, not even looking at me, and he presses the button. But that's enough. I know he understood what I want. I still don't know which dressing is actually correct for that cafe, but it doesn't matter. And then finally I finish off my request by saying, okay, I want it to go. And then he says, okay, that'll be, you know, $11. This is the first time he's spoken in several turns. And then he throws in another question, unless there's anything else. And this time I don't say anything. I just hand him my credit card and we complete the transaction. So looking at this interaction, which all I'm doing is ordering a tuna salad, there's intonation, there's pauses, there's body language, there's eye gaze, all these pieces of it, which our computers don't have access to any of that stuff right now. All they really get in these things are the words. And so you end up having to cram a whole lot of information and meaning into a very small signal. And again, that's what makes conversation design important, is that you don't have all these other things that you could rely on if you were speaking one-on-one with another human. This is an example I like to show to kind of illustrate how computers really still don't have much common sense. This is from a guy named Paul the trombonist, and he was texting with his wife about the groceries, and then he went to go practice his trombone. And the voice assistant didn't realize the conversation was over, and it did its very, very best to try and transcribe what he was saying, which was playing the trombone. And I just love that it just gets into this. I like how it has all these different words. Woo, 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 whap, 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 wah, wah, wah. It's trying. Now, a person, if this happened, would be like, oh, he's off playing the trombone. This isn't part of our conversation anymore. I can ignore this. But again, a computer is not that smart. It doesn't have that common sense. So this is another element that we cannot fall back on, assuming the computer has this common sense capability to plug in certain holes. So we have to find clever ways to get around that. And also, you know, another aspect of complexity is ambiguity of language. So every day, all day, we're disambiguating information between each other. So if you ask me, do you want coffee? And I say, coffee will keep me awake. Normally in an audience, I would ask you to raise your hand if you think this is, yes, I would like some coffee, and then raise your hand if you think, no, I do not want any coffee. And of course, the answer is, it depends, right? If it's in the beginning, if it's in the morning and I got a big paper to write, I might be like, yes, coffee will keep me awake. If it's right before bed, I'm probably gonna say, coffee will keep me awake. Like, no, I don't want that. This is easy for us. We do this all the time, using context. What time is it? Who am I talking to? What's going on around me? Computers, not so much. And another thing that I think is fascinating about how humans communicate is the importance of when we don't say anything, when we have a pause. So if I ask you, can I get a ride tomorrow morning? And more than a second, just 1 second goes by, there's something up. You probably don't want to give me a ride. And so I'll probably take my turn again, even though it's really your turn, and I'll probably be like, you're probably too busy. Yeah, our normal time between turns with humans is about 200 milliseconds. It's like a blink of an eye. It's like so fast. And if we deviate from that, we know that something's going on. And also, interestingly, a yes response is often just slightly faster than a no response. So we've got all that going on and we're processing it. And so when a voice assistant, due to latency issues, doesn't respond for 1 second, our brains are going like, oh, you know, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe it doesn't, you know, we intellectually, we're not thinking it doesn't want to respond to us, but it kind of might trigger that response anyway. So here's another place where voice assistants are not up to par with human communication. Another thing I like to say to folks who maybe come from a design background in something like web design. Sometimes when you design websites, you'll think about the structure and the layout and the colors and the imagery first, and you'll put, you know, placeholders, lorem ipsum, all throughout, and then you'll fill in the copy later. But with conversation design, the words are really the structure. So you have to start with the words from day one. You can't, and this happens all the time where people will come to a conversation designer and say, well, I built this whole conversational system, it's all done. Can you just take a look at the words real quick and just make sure they look okay and tweak a few here and there? And unfortunately, what'll happen if you do this, the conversation designer will start saying to you, well, why did you have this question here? And why did you put this here? And do you know the user, you know, and then they're gonna be like, whoa, 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 I just wanted to work. So if you have the opportunity to work on a project about conversation design, pull in your conversation designer from the beginning, because it'll end up impacting what you actually build. An example of this, a colleague of mine was working on the Google Assistant, was tasked with figuring out how to do business hours. So if you ask the assistant, you know, when your favorite restaurant is open. Now, if you're on a mobile phone, like something with a screen, then probably what'll happen is the card will pop up. So I'll say, what time is Sushi Ku, my favorite sushi place, open? And it will pop up a card. And it's on you, the user, to do the cognitive work. Like, is it open on Wednesdays for lunch? Is it open? What time does it close on Sunday? You got to do that work. Now imagine if we just translated this to a voice assistant. And I said, when is Sushi Ku open? And the smart speaker said back to me, Friday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., Saturday, 5 to 10 p.m., Sunday, 5 to 9:30 p.m., Monday, 11 a.m. I mean, forget it, right? Our brains can't really process that. With visual information, I can take my time, I can go back and forth. You can't do that with audio only. So when he decided to work on this, he looked at all the sort of different types of things somebody might ask, different types of questions around business hours. And then he realized he needed like over 60 different templates of responses for the voice only case. So for example, if somebody asks a yes/no question, the first thing you should say is yes or no. Is Sushi Ku open? No. On the other hand, if I say, what time does Sushi Ku open today? You shouldn't start with yes or no. So although the answers are kind of similar, they have a different structure. And you might say, well, do we really need to do this? Like, this is a pain. And obviously I'm biased as a conversation designer to say yes, but honestly, it's not just sort of like icing on the cake. It's not just sort of like a nice to have. It's really helping with things like cognitive load. If you do it in a way a human would more likely do it, that's what people are used to, and they're going to be able to process that information so much more easily. So you're really doing your users a disservice if you kind of shortcut this and make all the answers the same. And again, this is why you have to do it from the beginning, because this impacted the code that was written. We couldn't have done this at the end and then gone back and retrofitted. Okay, so I've talked about some of these examples. What are some guidelines on doing things right? So the first thing we like to talk about is our version of visual mocks or wireframes, which are sample dialogues. And you saw one at the beginning with the tuna ordering. It is essentially, each sample dialogue is one potential pathway between the user and the computer. And you write a bunch of these from the get-go. They're kind of like movie scripts. And just like movie scripts, you do what they do in Hollywood, which is you do a table read. You read them out loud. Even if you're writing a text-based chatbot, you should still read them out loud, because the way we type in a chat is more similar to how we speak than how we might write. And sometimes when we're just writing, we tend to write formally, and then when you read it out loud, you realize like, oh, I didn't put a contraction there, etc. Also, if you can get the person playing the part of the user to be somebody who's not familiar with your design, that's a bonus. And you'll just be really surprised at how, even with this low fidelity mock, how quickly you find problems right out of the gate. You'll say a prompt, as we call them, and someone will say something back that you're like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. And you'll realize, maybe I need to restructure my prompt. Maybe I need to change my design. It's also a really nice way to share the idea with any of your stakeholders, because everyone can read a sample dialogue and understand it. And it's a great way to iterate cheaply on your design and work out some of the kinks before you start building your first prototype. Also, just to remember that it comes in all these different surfaces. So for example, if you're designing for the Google Assistant ecosystem, you have to be thinking about how's it going to sound on the voice-only smart speaker? How's it going to sound on an intramodal device like a mobile phone where you can type or speak or swipe or tap, the car, person's in a different situation, you know, the watch. So you have to be thinking about all these different things, which does make it a little more complicated. It's true, but if you take that on in the beginning, you'll know which parts can be shared across all surfaces and which parts are a little bit different. And you saw that example with the business hours where there was definitely a difference. Sometimes there's not much difference. It just depends on the use case. So now I'm just going to do a couple more sample dialogues to demonstrate a few more design principles. And let's say you were working on creating an experience for the Google Assistant called Cool Animal Facts. And by the way, for anyone out there who is interested in like creating your own and playing around with these things, either on Alexa or on Google Assistant, there's software out there like VoiceFlow, for example, where for free you can go in and mock up an experience and then try it on your actual device. And both Alexa and Google Assistant allow you to publish it to the world. So if you built something you thought was really cool and fun, you can put it out there in the world and let anybody use it. So it's a lot of fun to play around. So let's say we make this one called Cool Animal Facts, and you talk to your assistant and it says, okay, welcome to Cool Animal Facts. What animal would you like to know about? The user says they love penguins. Great. If you want to know about their habitat or where they'd like to eat, what they like to eat, give you some great information about fish and krill and squid. Then you finish with a question. More about penguins, ask about another animal. I'm done, thanks. So a few things I want to point out about this that apply best design practices. First of all, one thing I often see people do is someone gets to their conversational experience and it's like, welcome to Cool Animal Facts. How can I help you? Because there's this idea right now, I think that, well, we can't sound like an IVR. We have AI. We're super intelligent. We just have to make this natural and conversational. And we're going to say, how can I help you? Well, your user's probably not going to succeed at that point because you probably, they might think they could say a million things about animals and you probably can't handle those things. So there's nothing wrong, especially at the beginning, with being a little more specific. Like, what animal would you like to know about? That's a really specific question that people know what to do. And this is also how humans often talk. We are not always leaping from conversation, topic to topic. We usually are staying on one topic. We're asking each other questions. It's a perfectly natural way to speak. So then another thing is what we call confirmation. So the user said penguins, and we usually try to confirm, like, okay, they said penguins. Because there's a myth that speech recognition is a solved problem and, oh, we're at 95% accuracy, everything's great. But in fact, speech recognition often doesn't work, especially for certain people. So we want to make sure that we are confirming, hopefully in a very easy, non-annoying way, like cool penguins, like moving on. And then one more thing I wanted to point out in this sample dialogue is at the end, the computer asks, do you want to hear more about penguins or ask about another animal? It asks for two things. The user did not say either of those things. And this is kind of one of the biggest lessons if you're working with conversation design, is people are going to say all kinds of stuff that you didn't expect. But again, they're not going to say random stuff. Someone's not going to say, how tall is Barack Obama, like right here. They're going to say things that are related. And you have to know that when you're building your system that that's going to happen, and just come to terms with it. And don't think, well, I told them they could say A or B, and they didn't say A or B. Those dumb users, they're wrong. You're going to get nowhere with that. So just recognize that people are going to say a lot of different things that you might not immediately expect. One other little example is one of my favorite things when I used to travel a lot, is I could be sitting eating my breakfast and I can just say, hey, G, is my flight on time? And it would give me the information like, yeah, flight's on time. So I'd given it permission to look at my calendar, which has my flight. This is another example where you could imagine if you were tasked with like, okay, make flight information available on a smart speaker. Somebody might be like, okay, well, we're getting back from the API is this, this, and this. So what we're going to say is flight 167 on United Airlines leaving San Francisco Airport at 1:36 p.m., leaving for, departing to Heathrow for 10.5 hours. Like, no. Too much. You have to translate it to this voice-only situation, which, again, yes or no, is it on time? Start with that. And then give just kind of the minimum of useful information. Like, yep, flight's on time, leave it. All right, if you remember one thing from this entire talk, this is it, which essentially is, again, we all have our way of talking, and that's great. Like even just something like ordering pizza. I might call up the pizza place and be like, I want 3 large mushroom pepperoni pizzas to go. But you might call up and say, hi, I'd like to order some pizzas. Oh, how many? 3. What size? Large. So we all have our ways of speaking, and we need to just accept that, embrace that, and just build and design with that in mind. And that requires not just good design principles, but also iterating. So that you put it out there with a small set of people and you look at some of the things people are saying and you're like, oh gosh, I didn't even think of that. I better make sure that we handle that. And so it's an iterative process. Because like with a button or a menu, you know what they pressed. Maybe they pressed the wrong thing, but you know what they pressed. With conversation, it's a little bit more of an educated guess. So the last few slides I have are just about the future. And this is my own personal speculation. This is not, some kind of roadmap or anything like that. But just thinking about like where might we be going with virtual assistants and things like that in the future. This example here is a trash can from a company called Simple Human that's voice activated. So you can say, open can, and it will open, and you can throw your trash in. How do you feel about that? It's like, on the one hand, it's like, oh, well, that's kind of convenient. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, is everything in my house going to start listening to me and be voice powered? Like, I don't know, like is my sink and my fridge and my oven, like, I don't know if that's a world we necessarily want to live in. So just, some food for thought. Another thing is, this is a photo I took at the San Jose airport of some robot babysitters. They don't babysit robots, they're supposed to babysit kids. And there's these 2 robots in this ball pit with some little kids. There's also a human minder in the ball pit, and I found that the kids were usually playing with the human, not the robots. But it just got me thinking, like, imagine, your young child grows up with their own virtual assistant. Maybe it's voice only, maybe it's a robot, whatever it is. And the virtual assistant learns all kinds of things about them and becomes their pal and their companion and knows them so well. And then that you grow up and then you come home and you've had this really bad day and you're like, hey, virtual assistant, I've had this bad day. And they know just what to say, oh, I'm sorry you had this bad day. Tell me more about it. On the one hand, it's like, wow, wouldn't that be nice? They're not going to be like, oh yeah, you think you had a bad day? What about my day? And they're not going to be like, well, how come you didn't do the dishes last night? It's going to be this very comforting, nice, non-judgmental thing. And on the one hand, I think it's amazing to have that kind of safe space to talk and go through your feelings. And I think it was with, I was reading with Xiao, which is a really popular bot in China, that for, I think it was like 12-year-olds, the most common topic was like complaining about their parents. so great to have a space to complain about your parents when you're a kid or when you're an adult. But on the other hand, obviously there's a flip side to this. It's like, okay, I get so comfortable with my virtual assistant, and now let's say I have a conflict with my best friend, and I'm like, hey, virtual assistant, can you tell my best friend's virtual assistant that I'm mad at her? Because it's like too terrifying to like have conflict in person with a real human. And then I'm sure some of you are familiar with work from Sherry Turkle, who talks about, she witnessed an older woman telling a really sad story about her son passing away to this robot, and she was just horrified. And she's like, you know, here we've got this thing that's completely incapable of experiencing emotion, and yet somehow, you know, we're supposed to be comforted by it and stuff like that. It's like scary. So certainly a lot to think about here. But my last slide is just a short movie clip. One of the things, sorry, I'm just adjusting my power here. It seems to be unplugged. 1 second.
Coffee, no. Plug that power back in.
Computer to die. Sorry. Okay. This last little video clip. So one of the problems with voice assistants right now is that a lot of times when you're out in public or whatever, you don't want to actually talk to them out loud, but maybe you still want to use it. Like for me, I can send a text message much faster if I'm speaking than typing. And sometimes I really would rather prefer to just talk to my phone. But if I'm on the train or something, I usually won't, because not necessarily because it's like super private, but just because I feel kind of funny about it. So I think one thing that will need to happen is that we'll need to have this ability to speak to our voice assistants without people hearing us. And there's work going on right now with this idea of subvocalization, where as you start to form the words, but before they actually come out of your mouth, this is a prototype from MIT Media Lab we're going to watch. It's kind of ugly, but it's kind of along your jawline. And it's looking at these micro signals as you start to form words, and it can figure out what words are about to come out of your mouth and send those to a voice assistant. And so you can speak without people hearing you. And one thing, sometimes I've seen headlines around this that say like, it's reading your mind. It's not reading your mind. You are starting to form the words, and it's just picking up on those cues much earlier. So let me hit play on this. If you can't hear it, don't worry about it, because there's no, you can see the subtitles, but it's about a minute long. Here we go.
Total $10.07.
All right, so one of the things I liked about that video is that they talk about augmenting humans, not replacing humans. I really like that idea of like, what tools can we build to sort of help us do what we want to do and not sort of take over what we're doing. So that's it. If you are interested in learning more about conversation design, Google has published a lot of best practices at actions.google.com/design. There's also my book, and also on my website, cathypearl.com. I've got links to other talks and articles, and also resources, like if you're interested in, you know, what podcasts or courses are there out there. And that's it.
My Lord, that was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Oh, are you on mute? I think you might be on mute.
Oh, am I on mute? Can you hear me now? Can people hear me?
Is it just me? Can everyone else hear you?
Yeah, Cathy, can you hear me? Oh, I don't know if Cathy can hear me. Oh. Oh dear, let me see. I don't think I could.
Put the volume on.
Heather says she can hear me.
Sure. I'm just checking speaker settings.
Oh dear.
Oh, now I can hear you. I think it must have been something on my end. So yes, now I can hear.
Thank you. So that was incredible. How many people on the chat window were literally with their mouths shut trying to say stuff to see what the sensation must be like? I was kind of going, and I was there. I promise you that right now, Mary is with me. I'm glad it's not just me, Mary, but I was there just kind of going, you know, genuinely trying to feel the sensation. Claire as well, you know, like, but it's really fascinating. Cathy, there's a wonderful gentleman we had speak a couple of years ago from Singularity University called Hani, and he does a huge thing for Singularity University about tech augmentation. And so one of the things that I did was we microchipped 10 people with an RFID chip inside their skin. And what they can do is they can do whatever they want to do with that chip. So they can put their key fob in to start their car. They can put maybe their fob for accessing their apartment or their flat into it. They can put a business card in, which could be picked up with an RFID reader. And he talked about the fact that, you know, tech augmentation is this weird thing that people are so scared of, but yet we're still doing it now with things like pacemakers.
Yeah, exactly. We were sort of going in baby steps already. I used to have this thing called a ring light. I don't know if any of you had heard of it, but it was a notification device. It looked like a big ring with a green stone, but you could set it so any notifications that came in, like a text message or that your Uber was there, it would buzz on your finger. And I loved it because it was so subtle. Unfortunately, there were so many hardware problems that they went out of business. But I just think, yeah, there's a lot of potential for that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things somebody had put to their chest, and when they pointed north, it just very gently vibrated in their chest, just because they wanted to. So every time they pointed north, they just feel this very slight sensation. And there was a blind person who it was a blind person, and every time he passed a brand new Wi-Fi network, it would play a little song in his ear. Just like walking around and hear all of these lovely little symphonies every time you hit a brand new Wi-Fi network, which is something again you augment. But I will send you his link. He's wonderful about augmentation of tech and exoskeletons, and actually looking at the possibilities of that. I have loads of questions. I can see keyword questions flooding in, so please put your questions into the question window, and I will start to ask Cathy them as well. So one of the questions I was going to ask you is about, with voice assistants and IoT on the increase, one of the things that really upsets me about this stuff as a technologist and as a cybersecurity geek is the fact I can't change the password on any of these things. It's kind of as default with Sonos and stuff like this, that it is as factory kind of made that I can't, you know, make it secure. So then the concerns about listening in and access are in there. Do you think that's something that will limit the growth of this, with kind of concerns about, you know, Big Brother listening in on you and sort of 1984 style?
Yeah, I think, I mean, anywhere I go, people are talking about that. Privacy is a huge concern for everybody, rightly so. I think with it's tricky. I think with, like, one of the things that we try to do with the assistant is by default, none of your audio recordings are stored. So when you speak, it does send it to the cloud so it can process it, but that recording is not stored. You can opt in. So if you want to say, hey, I want to contribute my audio recordings for anonymous, you know, improvement of speech recognition model, I'll opt in, but you have to opt in. You can also look at your phone to see, because as we know, sometimes these voice assistants wake up when we didn't actually say the wake word because they think they heard it, because they heard a similar thing. Like when I say to my son, like, hey, boo, sometimes like that'll wake it up. And you can also see on your phone, like any single time it has ever woken up. You can see that. You can delete it if you have recordings opted in. So we try to say, look, we want to be transparent. We want you to know when it did wake up and hear you. And you know, nothing that's happening before it hears the hot word is ever, you know, recorded or sent to the So we really are trying to make sure that we can bring comfort levels to people, but I get it, that doesn't make everyone, people are still sometimes a little like, this is kind of weird. It just depends on everybody's personal comfort level. I've been working in this field, for 20 years, and back in the day, I used to work on automated phone systems, and you call and talk to the computer or whatever, and I learned back then, like, how do we handle the data? How do we learn from what people are saying that we don't understand? How do we anonymize things? So I think for somebody like me in the industry, like, I have a pretty high comfort level. Like, my son has a voices in his room, and I'm okay with that. But again, I'm not going to tell anyone else what to do or how to feel, and it's certainly on people's minds, and I think companies are trying to address it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other kind of interesting things that struck me about your talk is about also sort of synergies with what Kate was talking about, which was around loneliness. And certainly there's huge amounts of elderly people speaking to them, especially now even more. Do they need more empathy, and then does that and almost simulate start to get a bit too close?
Yeah, it's so, as I was like, there's so many sort of different ways to look at it, good and bad. And the company I used to work for prior to Google called Sensei, which is the one that has a virtual nurse avatar. And a lot of the patients who used this app with this avatar and had conversations with the avatar were elderly, often in their 70s, 80s. And it was really interesting. Sometimes I would get the chance to talk to some of these patients firsthand, and they would have, some folks had a chronic health condition like congestive heart failure, and they were told by their doctor every day, you need to talk to the avatar, and takes your blood pressure and asks you a few questions. That information is triaged and sent to your clinician, and if like your blood pressure spikes or something like that, then the doctor might see that and call you. And I was amazed sometimes at how some people, even though it was a pretty straightforward 10-question conversation, people would get kind of attached to the avatar. And there's a story I always like to tell about a patient who was going on a cruise, and she told her doctor, I'm going to bring all my stuff. I'm going to bring my scale and my blood pressure cuff and my iPad that has Molly, the avatar, on it, so I can keep doing this. And the doctor's like, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about it for a week. And she's like, but I'm going to miss talking to Molly. And it's like, even though it's just this fairly simple avatar asking fairly simple questions, we still saw this attachment forming. And as far as empathy goes, again, I think this is really challenging because on the one hand, I saw positive reactions if the avatar would say, like, good job. A lot of patients were like, isn't that nice? Now, I will say a story about the UK is we also did a lot of work with the NHS, and we brought some of these conversations to the UK. And when they heard things like all these good jobs, they were like, no, take that out. Like, that's like too cheesy. But what was much, much, much harder was how you do your empathy when something is negative. So if somebody says, like, I'm in a lot of pain, we found more negative responses. If the avatar was like, well, I'm so sorry to hear that. It's like, no, you're not. You're an avatar, So positive empathy seemed to work okay sometimes, but negative empathy was really challenging. And I think it's best to fall back on, again, back to human communication. There's this book I love called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Wonderful book. And it talks a lot about the practice of acknowledgement. When somebody comes to you with their bad day and says, my boss did this, can you believe it? You don't say, well, you really could have taken it this other way and done this other thing, and maybe your boss wouldn't have been mad at you. And it's like, no. First, you validate, you acknowledge, and we can do that with our, I think, with our robots and our voice assistants as well. We're not judging. We're not saying, oh, I'm so sorry. But we're saying, oh, that sounds like you're telling me you had a hard day or whatever, and go down that path. But I think it's such a delicate and interesting subject that obviously a lot of other people are spending all the time thinking about, which is good.
And I think the third question before I go to one of the wonderful questions we've got flooding in is around, I guess, synonyms. So I suppose in your presentation, it probably illustrated the point really well of open the can, because a can is like a tinned good over here I suppose it's probably the same in America, right? But a tin can is what we call that. And so we would call that a bin. And I guess, in my experience as a technologist, I did a website years and years ago to a property website. And I was trying to work on some algorithms for how people search for things. And I was using a sort of my knowledge base of kind of flats and houses, and then looking at actually the raw data of what people were searching for, which is always a really great thing. The search results a lot more. But they were using things like road or apartment or accommodation or habitation. And I suppose when you're doing conversational design, how much do those cultural or linguistic elements in, or especially with things like slang or dialects or terms which you know, sort of regionalized, so to speak?
Yeah, that is so important. And we definitely, like at Google, we have what we call localization teams. So we might design something in US English, but then we have to look at, obviously, you know, not just other English like UK English or Australian English, but look at other languages. And we have people who are local to that area who are thinking about both things, like what the prompts, what it is the voice assistant is saying to the user, and then what we can expect back. And then, of course, there's also the speech recognition models, which are trained differently based on the region, so we can try to understand the dialects. But just again, to give an example from that previous company, Sensley, we were working on a symptom checker for the NHS, and we asked the user, you know, what's your main symptom? And we had like 150 symptoms that they might be able to choose from. And I could not believe for abdominal pain, I must have had to write like 100 different phrases that somebody might say. And again, it was also the localization issue. When we go to the UK, all of a sudden there's these words for abdominal pain that I'd never heard of. So again, that's why you have to go in phases. You have to start with, you know, do some data collection, make your best judgment, and then launch it to a small population, observe what things people are saying or typing that you forgot or didn't know. Add those until you get to a pretty high acceptance rate, and then launch it to the larger population. But for sure, you're always going to have to be thinking about different ways people say things, slang, different terminology. Yeah.
It is. It's a funny one. My even in the UK, we're obviously in Yorkshire, and for people who didn't join earlier on, you missed the fact that tech are based in Leicester, and we discussed coffee in a great county, and loves it as well, which is great news.
Yes, cannot wait to go to Harrogate.
The answer's big up Yorkshire, yes. Yes. Ilkley Bar Tap.
Yeah, Ilkley Bar Tap, yeah.
So yes, best place in England, Yorkshire. You've heard it first.
It is. I'm fully 100% on that.
Wonderful. So the lovely Sidra asks, could you repeat the software which could be used to build chatbots as they missed it?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch, but there's one called VoiceFlow, voiceflow.com. There's another one called Bot Society. There's another one called Jargon, Jargon. Those are a few out there that have different capabilities, but many of them have free trials or free licenses that allow you to experiment. Many of them, I think all three of those do not require coding. So yeah, you can get up and make your first. It's such a fun feeling the first time you get, even in a simulator, when you've built a bot and you can say something and it responds back to you. Well, at least for me, I think it's really thrilling. So it's fun to play around.
Brilliant. The lovely Mary asks, that last video sort of hinted at this, but I was wondering about the potential of the inclusion of non-verbal communications such as nodding could even be helpful for people with limited movement. And also, what is the hardest type of conversation or topics that you've had to design?
Oh gosh, a lot of good stuff in there. So one thing, yeah, about the nonverbal communication for sure. There's some interesting work at Google. I can't remember the name of the project, but they something keyboard, smart keyboard. There was there's a new way that, oh, my assistant just woke up. I thought I said, hey Google. See, I've got like 5 of them in my room, so I always have to like say, hey G instead of the full thing. Anyway, it allowed someone who could not communicate verbally and had very limited mobility, who was in a wheelchair, who was able to tap her head back against the pad in the wheelchair back to do sort of a Morse code way to do communication. And there's really interesting work like that. But for sure, I think a lot of companies are working on really a hybrid model is probably the best, because that's what we do naturally is, you know, here I am waving my arms around. just as a matter of course. And so we definitely want to look into ways of like maybe this could be stopped, like not playing music or something like that. So I think a combination is definitely the future. Also, I wanted to say about some accessibility things. There's some projects that I've found really interesting. Like last year, we announced this thing called Project Euphonia, which is seeking to build speech models for people maybe who have ALS or have had a stroke or something like that, where their speech is harder for voice assistants to hear. So being able to meet the needs of people like that, because some of those folks don't have the ability to maybe use their hands very well, or maybe if you have Parkinson's and you're kind of shaking, it's hard to tap. And we want to make sure that voice can benefit folks like that. Then the last question was like, what's one of the hardest things you've had to design? Gosh, trying to think. I think for me, it's been the things that are more open-ended, like chatbot style things, because there's just such a huge range of things that people might want to talk about. Once you get into a topic, it becomes a lot easier because you can kind of stay on that topic. But sort of this generalized, like, hey, how you doing? Let's chat. Let's have chit chat. Boy, is that hard. And one of the chatbots I really like is Mitsuko, which just won the Loebner, is that you said? Loebner Prize. For anyone who's not familiar with that, you may have heard of the Turing test, where Alan Turing came up with the idea that can someone fake being a human to a judge through a computer? So they run this competition, Loebner, where I don't think anyone's really truly successfully fooled humans, but they give a prize to the best one. I think Mitsuko's won maybe like 5 times. But one of the interesting things about the creator of Mitsuko is he talks a lot about how much of it is his manual heart and soul and sweat that he puts into that thing he's been building for years and years and years and years. A lot of people think, oh, AI, we don't have to do any manual work for these chatbots anymore. Really not true. There's still a lot that humans have to do to program in responses. And so sometimes things are more brittle than we might like, but we're ways out from like real AI taking over all that stuff.
Absolutely, because you I mean, with the chatbots and the voice assistants, things that I've worked on, you get loops, you get sort of infinite loops, and conversations stuck because it's a machine, and and it's almost great when it gets stuck, because then we can then program some more logic in to solve that issue, and then but it isn't sort of the analogy we always joke about with puppies here, that it's not for Christmas, it's for life. It's the same thing with almost a chatbot, a voice assistant.
I love that. I think a lot of people think, well, I'm going to build it and launch it and I can just walk away. And it's like, no, this is your baby.
You have to walk it and clean that crap up every day.
Yeah. Exactly.
So lovely Jenan says, it might just be me, but I feel quite awkward talking to systems like voice assistants. How do you overcome this barrier and make users at ease with a conversational UI?
I think there's maybe a few things to factor in there. I think one of them is to find something that you actually find useful. So if you're kind of pushing yourself to use it, I think you're definitely going to speak less naturally. If you find yourself every day asking for something that you find really useful, like you're like, hey, play me the news, or there's a short back and forth that you really like, I don't know, that might kind of make it seem a little less awkward. Honestly, I think a lot of it is getting used to it. It is kind of weird to address like a cylinder in the corner or whatever. That's a weird thing. So part of it's getting used to it. Part of it is, though, in design. That is, hopefully, as we move forward, we can continue to build less robotic-like responses and smarter responses that do feel a little bit more like a conversation. That will maybe help people feel a little less awkward. But yeah, I think it's hard to say. Like for somebody like me who's been talking these things for a long time, it feels relatively natural. But I can totally understand how it is a weird thing talking to this box. One of the things I think is interesting is watching kids interact with them, because they have way fewer kind of, baggage or whatever. And even seeing my son a few years ago when we first started using it, and all the ways he would explore with it. Even someone like me who's kind of, a lot of experience in this field, I'd be like, oh, it's not going to work. You can't say that. And it would work. And I'd be like, whoa, So watching kids and their ease with just trying stuff, I think is another thing.
It's really funny. I have a 6-year-old and I'm homeschooling the 6-year-old at the moment, and I had to do some religious education lessons about Jesus walking on water. And I got told off by the teacher by saying, apparently, at the end of sentences, because I have to record it. I have done this lesson. And my 6-year-old was kind of going, okay, so, you know, what did God look like as a child? And I kind of said, you know, I'm so sorry, Eliza, we don't know. It's a bit of a mystery, because she wanted to see a picture. And she said, don't worry, Mummy. I know somebody who's going to know the answer to this question. We can ask Siri. It was just like,
and did Siri know the answer?
No. There was something all about your talk, Cathy, as we've had so many people inspired to follow in your path. So Angie and 2 other anonymous attendees. So Angie says, awesome talk, thank you. I am keen to break into conversational design. I have notions of UX, having provided simultaneous translation of hundreds of assistant research sessions in Paris, but no formal training. As a linguist, would UX be an essential first step before going into VUX, or could I dive into CD training directly?
I think you could probably just dive into 60 training, because a lot of the people I work with, I'm more of I come from more of a computer science, cognitive science background, but a lot of my colleagues are linguists and come from that background. So I think it's a wonderful starting point. I think I mentioned briefly, I've got a website, cathypearl.com. There's an article on there called How to Become a Conversation Designer. And it just kind of walks through a few of the things that you might find helpful, some resources, some of the skill sets. Again, to me, my biggest advice is always start playing around with stuff, because once you start designing and even writing sample dialogues and reading them out loud with people, that's how you really sort of, like, sometimes we give workshops to companies and brands and stuff who want to get into this space. And again, I see when we get into the details of writing sample dialogues, they're like, oh, this is like more complicated than I thought, and I hadn't even thought of that thing. And it just kind of makes you go through that exercise of really thinking things through. So yeah, so I think, I don't think you have to necessarily become a UX expert first. I think learning how to be a conversation designer is a type of UX, and you will learn a lot of the lessons about UX, which again are very generally like respect the user, you know, make sure you know their context, usability, all those kind of standard things you'll find in conversation design as well.
Wonderful. And just advice. So follow-up questions for other people who are really interested. People have said, what would you say are the ideal CV for a conversational designer? Do you need to know languages like Python or XML to have a job as a conversational designer?
Definitely not. Again, some people do come from a coding background, but like as a conversation designer at Google, for example, you do not have to know how to code. Now, if you're at a startup like the startup I was at, it was helpful for me to know a little bit of coding, because then I could write especially analytics scripts to find out, you know, let's look at transcriptions and stuff. But for most, I would say for the majority of conversation design roles, you do not need to know how to code. If you're falling more in the natural language understanding role, which is a subset of conversation design, then sometimes, yeah, you need to know some scripting languages, maybe Python, maybe even just SQL, but it is not a requisite for many, many, many conversation design roles, which are definitely more on the design side and less on the analytical side.
So Lisa has a really interesting question to say, can we ever really teach voice assistants to handle human natural speech? Is it not about teaching the audience how to use voice assistants in the same way we learn how to touch and swipe screens?
That is a wonderful philosophical question that people are definitely on both sides of. I guess I would say I'm on the side of, I want my future to be that we speak just like we speak to people for the most part, with the caveat that sometimes right now we do have to learn a little bit of the things, the special way of talking to it, unfortunately. But again, I really feel like like an example I like to give is a while ago, like the internet was out and then we rebooted the router and I wanted to know if it was back up running, and I just spontaneously said like, hey G, are you working? And it was like, yes, I'm working. I was like, oh, the internet's back on. And I didn't have to think. I didn't have to think like, well, what is the phrasing I have to use to ask about the internet? And it was just, to me, that I consider that kind of a magical experience where it's just how I said it and it worked. And that's the world I want to live in. That being said, we are not there yet. And it will take a lot more work to make them. Again, part of it is the natural language understanding, but a lot of it is all this other stuff we talked about, like common sense and context that computers don't have that much of yet. So I think we are building towards that, and that'd be my preference. But there's also people who are definitely on the other side, and they're like, why are we bothering with that? Why not just make it work, teach people the right commands, let's go. So different ideas.
Yeah, it's great. And lovely Joanne says, do you always start the design with a sample dialogue and then read it out to test it? Or do you sometimes start by asking two humans to have a conversation and turn that into sample dialogue?
That is a great idea. So certainly I should have said more specifically, like you should definitely engage in user research and knowing your use case. A lot of times a company or brand will be like, well, we want to get in on this voice space, and let's build something. And it's like, well, stop. Do you have something that really fits with a conversational experience? Because maybe it doesn't. And that example you use of two humans having a conversation is really a great litmus test. It's like, is this use case or this problem we're trying to solve something you could have a conversation with another person about? That's probably a good candidate for a voice assistant. And so one of the things we do recommend is, like, if you're building a restaurant booking experience, go hang out with people who book restaurant reservations. They know it all. If it's a call center, I used to go spend time at call centers. Actually, I got to go to the 111 call center in the UK for a day and hear what kinds of things people were saying when we were working on our symptom checker. Call center agents know everything. Like, they know all the things that people are going to call about. They're a wealth of information. So yes, that's an awesome idea. Is if you have the opportunity to witness the real conversation between people who have it, that's a wonderful place to start.
Brilliant. Claire asks a wonderful question. How do you account for the difference with people under the influence of alcohol? Is there a way to account for the scattergun way of brain changes when under the influence?
Oh my gosh. I'm not aware of anyone working on like drunk models specifically, but that's a really interesting question because it just gets back to the, like, we should be able to understand people in many different facets, whether, again, like I was saying, it's like if you had a stroke or something and your speech was slurred, that's something we should still be able to try and understand. So I don't know of any like specific project on that, but as a general thing, we do have the ability to have different types of models that can learn from different situations. And so if we had a corpus of data of drunk people talking, we could probably build a good recognizer.
We have another question. So how do you overcome feature discovery? So with a visual UI, you can rely on signifiers to a certain extent to subtly guide users to what else they can try to do. So constantly suggesting things to try could become maybe potentially repetitive and a little jarring. Is there a way to mitigate this?
Yeah, I would say that honestly, I think this is one of the largest challenges we face today with things like voice assistants, because there are thousands of things these voice assistants can do, but how on earth do you know what they can and can't do? And how do you remember how to ask for the thing that you know they can do? Huge unsolved problem. So in terms of something like a voice-only assistant where you don't have visual affordances, there are different things. One of the things we like to rely on is what we call just-in-time help, where hopefully you don't like bombard somebody with like the 10 things that you can do at that instant, but maybe if they're already doing this task and you notice it's similar to another task they haven't used before, maybe throw in a by the way, you can also, buy shoes, I don't know, whatever, something related to what they're already doing. So give it to them at the moment their brain is like more receptive to hearing it. There was so we have this by the way framework that we use on the Google Assistant. A while ago, I was asking it a question. I asked, how old is Adam Ant? And it said, Adam Ant is 66 or whatever. And then it said, by the way, he's playing in concert in San Francisco on Friday. And I was like, what? Like, that to me was a good example. But as you said, it can also be annoying. Like sometimes if it's not related enough to what you were just doing, you're like, why? Like, you set a timer and then it tells you like, by the way, you can ask for the weather. It's like, I don't care. Like, so it is a delicate balance. And it's, to me, it's all about finding those opportunities where the information would be useful to them and introducing it there. But again, yeah, I think this is a huge, huge, huge unsolved thing that it's going to, hopefully we're going to work towards doing better. One of the ways I think that we can work towards doing better is eventually, it's this idea of acknowledging what you don't know. So an example I give is if you go to a concierge at a hotel and you say, hey, I want to rent a car, and let's say they can't rent cars. They wouldn't say, I don't understand. Do you want to make dinner reservations? They would say, I'm sorry, I can't rent a car. They would say what you asked for, and then they would be like, but there's a Hertz across the street, or you can get dinner reservations. And so what we need is I need to be able to ask my voice assistant anything, even if it can't do those things. I want it to be able to say like, oh, sorry, I actually can't rent cars. Just like tell me. Or like if I ask it in a weird way, like I say, I want the nearest train times. And I want it to be able to say, well, do you mean like BART, which is our local thing, or Caltrain? Lead me to the thing, because I said it more generically. So we need more of those types of strategies to get the person eventually to where they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iris says, how have you found remote working as a conversational designer in this pandemic? What would you say have been your challenges? Other than missing
I would say I would say on the one hand, the job lends itself fairly well to work from home. Like, I can still do design work at home. I have my test devices. I can still collaborate with folks either through meetings or documentation. So I wouldn't say as a designer it's been, that much of an extra challenge. I would say that the real challenges are more just general, which are, first of all, my job is in outreach. Normally, I travel a lot. I give talks, that's obviously changed hugely. And then for me personally, it's just I like being in an office. I miss seeing my coworkers in person, as many of us are like have Zoom fatigue, where at the end of the day you're just like, oh, another video. It's tiring being on Zoom after meeting after meeting after meeting. So I think it's just some of the standards. But I think the design job is actually lends itself fairly well to work from home in a lot of ways.
It's great to hear, actually. So Amy looks at the dystopian picture. So are you ever worried that we are training AI to understand humans, and there may be a future where they use this technology against us?
Yeah, my husband always says this. He's like, what if you tell the really smart AI to like, solve the problem of humanity, and then they decide the solution is to get rid of humanity. I definitely hear that. I would say I personally don't spend much time worrying about that. I feel like for a few reasons. I think first of all, I think part of it's like sort of seeing the state of AI from the inside. Sometimes you kind of realize like how far we have to go to do things. Like there's so many failures right now. Like I love, anytime I start to worry about it, I watch those videos from DARPA, the government agency, like robot contests. Like there's these great one where there's robots. The contest is for a robot to walk up to a door and open the door. And there's this great footage of like all these robots come to the door, they go like this, and they fall over. Or there's this great one where a robot's trying to put something on top of a shelf, and it not only fails to put it on the shelf, like the whole shelf collapses and it falls on the ground. I don't know. I guess certainly there's a possibility that someday in the far, 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 far future, who knows what will happen. It just doesn't happen to reach my like top 10 worry list.
To add to that, what people couple is AI with machine learning. And machine learning and AI are kind of two different things. They're friends, right? They're cousins. But I suppose a lot of the stuff we're talking about now is probably a lot more on the machine learning side than on the AI side. And I think that we're so far away from the sort of AI side of things. I'm totally kind of with you on that. But I think it also makes a big point about why this network exists with Empowering Women with Tech, that the future of machine learning and AI needs to be diverse, because we've got driverless cars, we've got, there's some really interesting statistics about the fact that driverless cars won't pick up potentially people with darker skin, and a lot of that algorithms that needs to be programmed in is why we need balanced teams of people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different educational backgrounds, affluent demographic backgrounds, so that the algorithms and the machine learning, which then goes into eventually the AI, is balanced, so that we don't have subconscious or known biases in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I worry much more about that type of thing in machine learning models being built by humans with this bias and mistakes a lot more than I worry about the AI becoming, turning on us or whatever. So yeah, maybe it's because I'm just more focused on like the immediate future and I'm not thinking as much about the long future. But yeah, agreed. To me, that's more of a worry and a concern right now, is to make sure the right people are involved in learning, training the ML, and also observing the ML, having outside observers who can vet algorithms, things like that are so important.
We've got one. Claire says, how do you decide the personality of voice that fits your organization?
Persona for sure is like a really big thing to think about. It's interesting because on the one hand, I think a lot of people are in the camp where they don't necessarily realize that persona is really important. And one thing we always like to say is like, if you don't design a persona, your user will basically. So if you don't sort of get ahead of it and decide this is how you want the personality of your bot or your voice assistant to be, people will naturally ascribe. Like we do that with a pet rock, we do that with everything. We ascribe personality traits. So you want to get ahead of it and plan. But in terms of how you decide, it's interesting because there's this whole spectrum, right? If you're designing a persona for something like the Google Assistant, which is supposed to be sort of all things to all people, you have to make sure that it's something that is helpful and efficient and friendly, and maybe you don't go too crazy with the personality. Whereas if you're designing a super fun trivia game, or it's some like fan-based storytelling experience, you want to really amp up the persona and you want to make sure that it's engaging and exciting. Maybe you want to use a recorded voice instead of text to speech. So it's just really important to always think about who is the audience, what is the purpose. Often when we're doing persona design, we think like, even down to like, what are the common phrases that this persona might say versus what are some phrases this persona would never say? Like, is it formal? Is it casual? All kinds of things like that. So it's definitely important to spend some time on that. Sometimes we test the persona with different audiences to see what the reaction is. The stronger your persona is, often the more polarizing it will be. Like you'll have people who love it and people who hate it. And maybe that's okay for your audience. So you just have to decide, who are you shooting for.
And then the last question, especially with your Indiana Jones poster in the background. Iris asks, talking about machines and somehow dystopian futures, what do you think are good examples of conversational design and AI represented in the media? You've obviously had films like Her, through to 2001. In what we discovered with Kate Devlin's wonderful talk is how the media can almost be painting a dystopian future that doesn't really exist. But I suppose with conversational design, it's probably a little bit more 50-50 that you have some dystopian and utopian examples, or more empathetic examples. Where would you say have been some good illustrations in the media?
Gosh, I guess it depends what you mean by good, because I'm thinking of like my favorites, which aren't necessarily like good, but like what springs to mind, for example, right now is I'm reading the latest book in the Murderbot series. If anyone's familiar with that, it's about like a, it's not exactly a robot, but it's a I'm not using the right word, creature, but it's a sentient being. And one of the things I love the most about this character is that it doesn't really know how to act around humans per se, but it loves consuming human television dramas. And my favorite parts about these books are the way that it interacts both with other AIs and with humans. I think it's fascinating exploration of that space. I also really enjoyed, I think it was in Solo, one of the new Star Wars movies, the robot in that. Wasn't that played by Phoebe Walker-Bridge, the woman who did Fleabag?
Yeah.
Anyway, so amazing. I love like the humorous, more sort of, they're like flawed, but they're like people. They're flawed like people. They're interesting. I love those kind of representation of bots. Trying to think of any other examples off the top of my head. even just like thinking back to like something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where there was the shipboard computer that had all these different personalities. I thought Douglas Adams was like way ahead of his time, thinking about like there was the annoying, hyper cheerful personality, and then there was the morose personality, and I thought that was lovely. And so I dislike like sort of the perfect AI that's like, you know, just robotic and has no personality and no interesting
Have you ever
traits.
watched the UK TV show Red Dwarf?
I have not. I know what it is, but no, I haven't actually watched it.
That's great. There is a computer in the ship called Holly, and they have a casting change. So I can't remember if it starts as a male and then turns to a female Holly.
Very.
And she and he are probably my favourite. They're just so sassy. So if you've never watched it, I would definitely recommend some Red Dwarf. So thank you ever so much to the incredible Cathy Pearl. We've had some amazing comments in saying fascinating. Thank you so much from Sandra, from James Brinning. Thanks, Cathy. Super interesting. Angie, awesome talk. Thank you. Heather had to head off. Amazing talk. Thank you so much, Cathy. Mary, really interesting. Thank you. Lynn, thank you to Cathy. Claire Winterbottom, that was amazing. Thank you. Annie, thank you. That's just been awesome. Lots of love. Thank you. Wonderful. And thank you for handling the dystopia, says Amy Oliver. Thank you for answering my question, says Ira. Super excited. Angie, thank you. Lots of food for thought. Perfect way to spend the evening from Joanne. Thank you. Agreed. Thank you very much. From Pam Money. Wishing everyone a lovely evening. Harriet's is so interesting. Wonderful, Cathy. It was so insightful and eye-opener. Thank you, Cathy. Great presentation. There is so much love from Yorkshire. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well done as well.
Thank you to everybody who attended this evening. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. I love talking about this stuff, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to everybody.
Thank you. And to everyone who's just joined us for the first time, follow us at Empower with Tech on Twitter and join our meetup group so you'll get pings for all of our future online events as well.